street boy changes the life of a millionaire's crying son with a single sentence.
On a rainy dawn in central London, Luke, a 9-year-old homeless boy, sought shelter among the awnings and dark alleys of the city. His empty stomach and wet feet no longer hurt as much as the loneliness that had become his constant companion since he had lost his parents. Even on that night, like so many others, something different hung in the air. The silence of the sleeping city was broken by a persistent, sharp sound. A cry. But it wasn't just any cry. There was despair in that sound, fear, fragility, and it caught Luke's attention as few things could. Following the sound, the boy reached the door of a private hospital, closed at that hour of the morning. Next to the emergency entrance, almost invisible under the shadow of an awning, was a straw basket covered by a damp blanket. Inside it, a baby cried with all the strength such a tiny body could muster. Beside the blanket, a note hastily scrawled on a torn sheet. "Please take care of him. I can't anymore." No name, no explanation. Instinctively, Luke knelt before the basket. He extended his pinky finger. The baby, as if knowing he was no longer alone, gripped that finger with surprising strength and, as if by magic, stopped crying. Two clear eyes met Luke's, and something happened there. A silent yet powerful connection, an invisible bond forming between two souls wounded by abandonment. Without much thought, the boy pulled the basket close to him and fled through the deserted streets, as if protecting it had suddenly become his most urgent mission. He found shelter in an abandoned car park near Trafalgar Square. The leaky roof didn't offer much protection against the drizzle, but there were corners there where few dared to enter. With pieces of cardboard, he improvised a bed for the baby, who still had no name, but who came to be affectionately called my brother, or simply little one. Luke didn't know how to care for a baby, but he knew what it was like to feel hunger, cold, and fear. And if he could prevent the little one from experiencing that, he would do everything possible, and the impossible. The rain continued to fall outside, creating a curtain of water that separated that makeshift refuge from the rest of the world. Luke looked at the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully, wrapped in the blanket that was no longer so damp. The boy felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't hunger, nor cold. It was something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the feeling of being needed, of having someone who depended on him, of not being completely alone in that immense and indifferent world. He remembered his own parents, his mother, Joanna, who worked as a cleaner and always came home with rough hands and a tired smile. His father, Mark, who did odd jobs as a bricklayer and dreamed of building his own house one day. They lived in an East End slum, in a wooden shack that swayed when it rained heavily. But it was a home. It smelled of food on the stove. There was laughter. There were tight hugs before bed. Everything changed that Sunday afternoon. Luke was playing ball in the alley when he heard the screams. He ran home and found neighbors clustered at the door. Someone held him by the shoulders, preventing him from entering. He saw the bodies being covered with white sheets that quickly turned red. He never knew exactly what happened. Some said it was a robbery, gone wrong. Others spoke of debts, of dangerous people, of things a child shouldn't hear. What Luke knew was that from one moment to the next, he was alone. Distant relatives appeared at the wake, but no one wanted to take him in. They said they already had too many children, that life was difficult, that they couldn't afford it. An aunt even suggested he go to a shelter, but Luke ran away before anyone could make that decision for him. He preferred the streets. At least there, no one would pretend to care. In the first few days, he cried hidden under underpasses. Then he learned that crying didn't fill his stomach or ward off the cold. He learned to beg for coins at traffic lights, to rummage through bins for food, to sleep with one eye open. He learned that the world was harsh on those who had no one. And he learned, above all, not to trust anyone. But now, looking at that helpless baby, Luke felt that perhaps things could be different. Perhaps he could be for that little being what no one had been for him. Perhaps he could protect him, care for him, make sure he never felt the emptiness that Luke carried in his chest every day. The baby stirred, making a soft sound. Luke reached out and lightly touched his tiny head. His hair was fine and soft, almost non-existent. His skin was warm and delicate. The boy felt a wave of tenderness so strong it almost hurt. He promised there, in that abandoned car park, under a leaky roof, that he would do everything in his power to keep that baby safe. When the day began to break, Luke went in search of food. He left the baby hidden among the cardboard, praying that no one would find him. He ran to a bakery that usually threw away the previous day's bread. He managed to grab some from the back door before the bin lorry passed. He also picked up a bottle of mineral water that someone had left half empty on a pavement table. But the baby needed more than that. He needed milk. Luke knew that. He had seen mothers giving bottles to their children in the parks. But how to get milk and how to give it to the baby without a bottle? That's when he thought of Mrs. Rose. She was an old lady who sold homemade sweets in Hyde Park. Luke always saw her setting up her stall early in the morning. She was one of the few people who treated him with kindness, who didn't avert her gaze when he approached. Sometimes, when there were some sweets left at the end of the day, she would give them to him. Luke ran to the park. Mrs. Rose was already there, arranging the pots of fudge and coconut kisses on the checkered tablecloth. When she saw the boy approaching, breathless and wide-eyed, she frowned. "Good morning, Luke. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Luke hesitated. He didn't know if he should tell her, but he looked into those kind eyes and felt he could trust her, at least a little. "Mrs. Rose, do you have any milk and nappies? It's just that I found an abandoned puppy. It's still very small. It needs milk." Mrs. Rose observed him for a long moment. Her experienced eyes seemed to read beyond the words. She knew it wasn't a puppy. She knew that desperate look, that urgency. But she also knew that pressing him wouldn't help. Luke was like a frightened bird. Any sudden movement, and he would flee. "A puppy, you say? What a coincidence. I have some nappies stored at home, from when I looked after my grandson. And I think I have some powdered milk, too. Can you wait here? I'll be back in half an hour." Luke nodded, relieved. Mrs. Rose gathered her things and left in a hurry. She returned 40 minutes later with a plastic bag full. Inside were nappies, wet wipes, nappy rash cream, a can of powdered milk, and even a baby bottle. "Take good care of that puppy, you hear? And if you need anything else, you know where to find me." Luke took the bag as if it were treasure. He thanked her with a nod and ran back to the car park. When he arrived, the baby was awake and starting to whimper. Luke prepared the bottle as best he could, mixing the powdered milk with water. He didn't know if the temperature was right, but the baby sucked eagerly, as if he hadn't eaten in days. While feeding the little one, Luke felt a strange happiness. It was good to care for someone. It was good to be important to someone. But there was also fear of not succeeding, fear of failing, fear that someone would find out and take the baby away. The following days were a routine of discoveries and challenges. Luke learned to change nappies, albeit clumsily. He learned to recognize the different types of cries: hunger, dirty nappy, sleep, discomfort. He learned to rock the baby in his arms until he fell asleep. And he learned, above all, that loving someone was both the easiest and the hardest thing in the world. But the city was unforgiving, and secrets, no matter how great the efforts to hide them, always found a way to come to light. It was on a Tuesday morning that Luke saw the poster for the first time. It was pasted on a lamppost near the park where Mrs. Rose set up her stall. The image was a little blurred by the previous night's rain, but it was still clearly visible, a smiling baby with a small birthmark on his neck. Above the photo, in block letters, "Missing." Below, a detailed description and a contact phone number, and at the bottom, highlighted, "Reward of £50 million." Luke felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. 50 million. It was a number so large he couldn't even imagine it. It would be enough to buy a house, food for the rest of his life, new clothes, shoes that didn't hurt his feet, everything he had ever wanted and never had. But then he thought of the baby, the way he gripped his finger, the toothless smile that was beginning to form, the scent of talcum powder and milk, and he realized he couldn't do it. He couldn't hand him over. Not for money, not for anything. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if the baby's family was suffering? What if they were desperate, searching for him day and night? Luke knew what it was like to lose someone. He knew the pain it caused. Would it be fair to make another family go through that? But he also knew what it was like to be abandoned. And that baby had been left in a basket, at the door of a hospital, in the middle of the night. Someone had chosen to leave him behind, and Luke had chosen to stay. He tore the poster from the pole and crumpled it in his pocket. He didn't want to think about it now. He didn't want to make decisions he wasn't sure were right. He just wanted to go back to the car park, pick up the baby, and pretend, even if only for a few hours, that they were a real family. But fate, as always, had other plans. That same afternoon, while Luke was feeding the baby a bottle sitting on a park bench, a woman approached. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, and her eyes were red from crying. She wore simple, but clean clothes. She carried a large shoulder bag. "Excuse me for bothering you. Have you seen a baby around here? Very small, with a little mark on his neck?" Luke's heart raced. Instinctively, he pulled the baby closer, covering the mark with the blanket. He shook his head, trying to appear indifferent. "No, ma'am, I haven't." The woman sighed, defeated. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I lost him, you see, a few days ago already. I was the nanny. I just stopped for a minute at the bakery, and when I came back, he was gone. The family is desperate. So am I. I haven't slept properly since it happened. I keep thinking if he's all right, if he's hungry, if he's cold." She looked at Luke, truly seeing him for the first time. She saw a thin boy, in dirty clothes, holding a baby in his arms with a delicacy that contrasted with his appearance. "Is this baby your brother?" Luke nodded quickly. "Yes. My mum asked me to look after him while she works." The woman seemed to believe him. Or perhaps she was too tired to question. She took one last look around the park and walked away, her shoulders slumped, defeat etched in every step. Luke waited until she was out of sight. Then he stood up and left as quickly as he could, without running so as not to draw attention. He needed to get off the streets. He needed to find a safer place. But where? That's when he remembered the church. St. Joseph's Church, near Covent Garden. Father John always left the doors open and welcomed anyone who needed it. Luke had slept there a few times on the back pews when the cold was unbearable. He arrived at the church late in the afternoon. Father John was lighting the altar candles. When he saw Luke enter with the baby in his arms, he raised his eyebrows, surprised, but said nothing. He just gestured for the boy to sit down. Luke chose a pew in the back, away from the door. He laid the baby beside him and sat there, quiet, listening to the silence of the church. It was a different silence from the silence of the streets. It had peace. It had safety. It had something Luke couldn't name, but that made his chest tighten in, a good way. Father John approached after a while. He sat beside Luke, respecting the distance. "Does this baby need help?" Luke shook his head. "No, Father. He's fine. I'm just looking after him. And you? Are you all right?" Luke didn't know what to answer. Was he all right? He was tired. He was scared. He was confused. But he was also happy. Happy in a way he didn't fully understand. "Yes, Father, I am." Father John nodded. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, a light, almost imperceptible touch. "If you need anything, I'm here, and God is too." Always. Luke wasn't sure if he believed in God, but at that moment, in that silent church with the baby sleeping beside him and the priest's gentle hand on his shoulder, he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that there was something greater looking after them, that they weren't completely alone in that vast and frightening world. They spent the night in the church. Luke slept little, waking at every sound, every movement of the baby. When the sun rose, Father John brought bread and hot milk. They sat together on a pew and ate in silence. "You know, you can't stay hidden forever, don't you?" Luke looked at the priest, startled. "I'm not hidden." Father John smiled sadly. "We are all hidden from something, my son, but eventually, life finds us, and when that happens, it's best to be prepared." Luke didn't fully understand what the priest meant, but he held those words in his heart, along with so many other things he didn't understand, but felt were important. In the following days, Luke and the baby became constant presences in the church. Father John asked no questions. He just offered shelter, food, and sometimes silent advice. Mrs. Rose continued to help with nappies and milk, and Luke continued to care for the little one with a dedication that impressed everyone who saw them. But the city continued searching. The posters multiplied. The story of the missing baby dominated the news. The Montgomery family, owners of one of London's largest construction companies, spared no effort to find their son. Edward Montgomery, the father, appeared on television every day, making emotional appeals. Claire Montgomery, the mother, was hospitalized, sedated, unable to cope with the pain of loss. And in the midst of all this, Luke carried on, day after day, caring for the baby as if he were his own, because, in a way he was, not by blood, not by law, but by choice. And that, Luke was beginning to understand, was what truly mattered. But the world doesn't run on good intentions alone, and secrets, however well kept, always find a way to escape. It was on a Thursday that everything began to fall apart. A social worker was doing rounds in the area. Someone had reported that there was a child living in the church with a baby. Father John tried to protect Luke, but the woman was firm. She wanted to see the baby. She wanted to know where he had come from. Luke panicked. He picked up the baby and ran. He ran through the streets as he had never run before. He heard shouts behind him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, he would lose the baby. And losing the baby was losing the only thing that gave meaning to his life at that moment. He ran until he couldn't anymore. He stopped in a dark alley, breathless, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. The baby cried, frightened by the commotion. Luke rocked him, whispering words of comfort he didn't even know where they came from. "It's all right, little one. It's all right. I won't let anyone take you, I promise." But it was a promise Luke didn't know if he could keep, because the world was big, and he was just a boy. A lonely, frightened boy, trying to protect something too precious for his small hands. And as night fell over London, as the city lights came on one by one, Luke held the baby against his chest and cried. He cried for the first time since he had found that little being. He cried out of fear, out of exhaustion, out of love. He cried because he knew he couldn't go on like this forever, but he also knew he couldn't give up. Not now, not after everything they had been through together. The baby stopped crying and looked at Luke with those clear, trusting eyes, and in that gaze, the boy found strength to continue, at least for one more day, at least for one more night, because sometimes that's all one can do. Continue, one day at a time, one night at a time, holding tightly to what we love, even when the whole world seems to conspire to snatch it from our hands. And Luke, even though he was just a child, already knew that. He knew it better than many adults, because he had learned the hard way. He had learned it on the streets, in loneliness, in pain. But he had also learned, in those last few days, that love was stronger than all of it. That love could transform an abandoned boy into a protector. That love could make miracles happen in the most improbable places. And while the city slept, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its alleys and corners, Luke and the baby snuggled together, two castaways clinging to the same piece of wood in the middle of a vast and stormy ocean. But the storm was just beginning. And what would come next would test Luke in ways he never imagined possible. It would test his courage, his determination, his love. And in the end, it would reveal truths that would change everything. Forever. The morning arrived cold and gray. Luke woke up with an aching body, curled up in a corner of the alley where he had spent the night. The baby slept peacefully in his arms, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. The boy looked around, trying to get his bearings. He was in a neighborhood he didn't know well, far from the church, far from Mrs. Rose, far from any familiar face. He needed a plan. He couldn't keep running aimlessly. But what plan could a 9-year-old boy have, alone, with a baby in his arms and the whole world looking for them? He got up slowly, careful not to wake the little one. He walked to the main street and saw a newsstand. On the front page of all the newspapers, the same photo, the smiling baby with the birthmark on his neck. The headline screamed, "Montgomery family offers £1 million reward for missing baby." Luke felt his stomach churn. He quickly read the article. It spoke of Edward and Claire Montgomery, a successful business couple who had everything in life, except the son who had mysteriously disappeared. The nanny, Felicity, was being investigated, but swore she had left the baby in the pram for only 2 minutes while buying bread. When she returned, he was gone, without a trace, without witnesses, as if he had evaporated. The police were working with several hypotheses: kidnapping, child trafficking, even the possibility that the nanny herself was involved. But nothing explained the complete disappearance. No security cameras had recorded anything. No witnesses had seen anything. It was as if the baby had simply vanished. But Luke knew the truth. The baby hadn't been kidnapped. He had been abandoned, left in a basket at the door of a hospital with a desperate note. Someone had wanted to get rid of him, and that someone was not the Montgomerys. Luke's head spun with possibilities. Who would have abandoned the baby? The nanny. But why? And if she had abandoned him, why was she pretending he had been kidnapped? Nothing made sense. The baby began to stir, signaling that he was waking up. Luke knew the hungry cry would soon come. He needed milk. He needed nappies. He needed help. He thought of Mrs. Rose, but going back to the park was risky. The social worker might be there, or the police, or anyone who might recognize the baby. That's when he remembered Nancy. Mrs. Rose had once mentioned she had a nurse friend who lived near Covent Garden, a good woman who helped those in need. Luke didn't know the exact address, but he knew she lived in an old 3-story building with a bakery on the ground floor. He decided to take a chance. He walked through the streets, keeping his head down, the baby hidden under an old coat he had found in a dumpster. It took him almost an hour to find the building. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and knocked on the first door. A woman in her 60s answered. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun and tired but kind eyes. She wore a floral apron and smelled of laundry detergent. Yes? Luke hesitated, but the baby chose that moment to start crying. The woman looked at the bulge under the coat and frowned. Is that a baby? Luke nodded, defeated. There was no point in hiding anymore. The woman opened the door completely. Come in, quickly. Luke entered. The apartment was small but clean and organized. It smelled of coffee and toast. The woman closed the door and locked it. Let me see that baby. Luke took off his coat. The baby cried loudly, his face red with hunger and discomfort. The woman picked him up with the confidence of someone who had cared for many children. She quickly examined him, checking his nappy, temperature, eyes, mouth. He's hungry, and his nappy is dirty, but he seems healthy. You're Luke, aren't you? Mrs. Rose told me about you. Luke nodded, relieved. So this was Nancy. Sit there. I'll take care of him. Nancy changed the baby's nappy with quick and efficient movements. Then she prepared a bottle, tested the temperature on her wrist, and gave it to the little one, who sucked eagerly. Meanwhile, she looked at Luke with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. This baby isn't your brother, is he? Luke shook his head. I found him. He was abandoned in a basket, at the hospital door. Nancy sighed deeply. Do you know who he is? Luke didn't answer, but the answer was written in his silence. He's the Montgomery baby, isn't he? The one in all the papers. I didn't know at first. I only found out later. But he was abandoned, Nancy. Someone left him there, with a note saying they couldn't take care of him anymore. And you thought the best solution was to keep him. Luke, you're 9 years old. You live on the streets yourself. How do you think you're going to take care of a baby? I am taking care of him. He's fine. He's eating, he's clean, he's safe. Nancy looked at the baby, who was now drinking peacefully in her arms. Then she looked at Luke, at that thin boy in dirty clothes, but with eyes full of determination and love. You know you'll have to give him back, don't you? His family is desperate. His mother is hospitalized. His father hasn't slept in days. They love this baby. Luke felt tears burn his eyes. But someone abandoned him. Someone didn't want him. It wasn't his parents, Luke. I can guarantee you that. I don't know who it was, but it wasn't them. Then who was it? Nancy shook her head. I don't know. But that's the police's job to find out, not yours. Luke wiped his tears with the back of his hand. I can't hand him over. I promised I would take care of him, that I would protect him. And you kept your promise, but now he needs to go home, to his family, to people who can give him everything he needs. I give him everything he needs. I give him love. Luke's voice was choked. Nancy felt her heart clench. She put the baby on the sofa, surrounded by cushions so he wouldn't fall, and knelt in front of Luke. She held the boy's face in her hands. I know you give him love, and that's the most important thing in the world. But love doesn't fill stomachs. It doesn't cure diseases. It doesn't provide education. This baby needs more than you can offer right now. And you also need help, Luke. You're a child. You deserve to have a home, go to school, play, be happy. I don't want any of that. I just want to stay with him. Nancy sighed. She knew there was no point in arguing. Luke was attached to the baby in a way that went beyond reason. It was emotional. It was visceral. It was the desperate need not to be alone, to have someone to love and be loved by. Look, how about this? You two stay here today. I'll give you food, a bath, a safe place to sleep, and tomorrow we'll talk calmly about what to do. All right? Luke hesitated, but he was tired. So tired. And the offer of a safe place, even if only for one night, was too tempting to refuse. All right. Nancy smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. Then let's go. First a bath. You stink, lad." Luke smiled for the first time in days, a small, shy, but genuine smile. Nancy prepared a warm bath for Luke, while the baby slept on the sofa. The boy stayed under the shower for so long that the water began to cool. When he came out, Nancy had set out clean clothes. They belonged to a grandson who no longer lived with her, but who had left some things behind. They were big on Luke, but they were clean and smelled fresh. Then it was the baby's turn. Nancy bathed him carefully, talking to him the whole time, making faces that drew giggles. Luke watched everything, learning, memorizing every gesture. When everyone was clean and fed, Nancy improvised a bed for the baby in a large drawer lined with soft blankets. Luke slept on the sofa, but spent the night waking up to check if the little one was all right. The next morning, Nancy prepared a hearty breakfast: bread with butter, hot milk, fruit. Luke ate as if there were no tomorrow. It had been days since he had had a real meal. While they ate, Nancy brought up the subject again. "Luke, you need to think with your head, not just your heart. This baby has a family that loves him and is suffering greatly from his disappearance. Don't you think they deserve to know he's all right?" Luke stirred the food on his plate. "What if they don't take good care of him? What if it happens again?" "What happens again?" "Someone abandoning him." Nancy shook her head. "That won't happen. The Montgomerys love this baby. You saw the reports. They're desperate. But someone abandoned him. Someone who had access to him. Someone trusted." Nancy fell silent, thoughtful. Luke was right. Something didn't make sense. Someone close to the family had abandoned the baby, and until they found out who, the danger remained. "Look, how about we do this? I'll call the police and tell them the baby is here safe, but we won't hand him over until we're sure everything will be all right. We'll ask to speak to the parents, to see if they really want him back." Luke looked at Nancy, hopeful. "What if they don't want him?" Nancy smiled sadly. "They will, Luke. You can be sure of that." But Luke wasn't sure of anything. He had learned too early that the world was unpredictable and cruel, that people said one thing and did another, that promises were easily broken. Still, he agreed, because deep down, he knew Nancy was right. He couldn't keep running forever, and the baby deserved more than a life on the streets, even if it was with someone who loved him. Nancy picked up the phone and dialed the number that was in all the newspapers. They answered on the first ring. "Hello? I have information about the missing baby." On the other end of the line, there was a tense silence. Then a masculine voice, hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. "Where is he? Is he all right?" "He's all right. He's safe. But before I tell you where he is, I need to speak to the parents, personally. I'm the father. Edward Montgomery. Please tell me where my son is." Nancy looked at Luke, who was holding the baby against his chest, his eyes wide with fear. "I'll send you the address, but come alone. No police, no press, just you, and the mother, if she's able. She's hospitalized, but I'll come. I'll come now. Please take care of my son until I get there. He's being very well cared for, Mr. Montgomery. You can rest assured." Nancy hung up and looked at Luke. "He's coming here. Soon." Luke nodded, mute. He felt as if he was about to lose something precious, as if a part of him was being torn away. The next 2 hours were the longest of Luke's life. He sat on the sofa, holding the baby, memorizing every detail: the scent, the weight, the way his tiny fingers closed around his own, the toothless smile, everything. When the doorbell rang, Luke's heart raced. Nancy went to answer it. At the door, a tall man, in a crumpled suit, red eyes and unshaven. Edward Montgomery seemed to have aged 10 years in a few days. "Is he here? Is my son here?" Nancy nodded and opened the door. Edward entered, and his eyes immediately found the baby. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He took 2 steps towards Luke, but stopped when he saw the boy flinch, pressing the baby against his chest. "Please, don't come closer." Edward raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "It's all right. I just want to see if he's okay." "He's okay. I looked after him. I fed him, changed his nappy, bathed him. He's okay." Edward looked at that thin boy, in clothes too big for him, holding his son with such delicacy and love. And he understood. He understood that this boy had saved his son. He had cared for him when no one else could, He had loved him when it was easier to abandon him. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking care of him. Luke didn't answer. He just looked at the baby, who was starting to whimper. He's hungry. He needs to feed. Nancy brought a bottle. Luke gave it to the baby, who sucked eagerly. Edward watched everything, moved. How did you find him? Luke told the story, from the cry in the early morning to the basket at the hospital door. The note, the decision to stay with him, the days on the streets, caring, protecting, loving. Edward listened in silence, tears streaming freely down his face. When Luke finished, he knelt in front of the boy, meeting his eyes. You saved my son. I don't know how to thank you. No need to thank me. I just did what was right. You're 9 years old. You live on the streets. It would have been much easier to have left him there, or to have handed him over for the reward. But you didn't do that. You cared for him as if he were your own. It's just that... He stopped crying when I picked him up, and I felt like I had to stay, that he needed me. Edward smiled through his tears. And he really did. You're a hero, Luke. I'm not a hero. I'm just a boy. You're much more than that. Edward slowly extended his arms, giving Luke time to decide. The boy looked at the baby one last time. He kissed his tiny forehead, whispering a silent goodbye. Then, with trembling hands, he handed the little one to Edward. The businessman held his son as if he were the most precious thing in the world, and he was. He pressed him against his chest, feeling the scent, the warmth, the life pulsing there. His son, alive, safe, thanks to a boy who had nothing, but who had given everything. You'll be all right, Luke, I promise. I'll take care of you too. Luke shook his head. I don't need anything. Yes, you do. You need a home. Food, school, a family. I don't have a family. Now you do. Luke looked at Edward, confused. The man smiled. You saved my son. That makes you part of our family, if you want to, of course. Luke didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to accept. He wanted a home, a bed, food every day. But another part was afraid. Afraid to trust. Afraid to get attached and lose everything again. I need to think. Edward nodded. All right. Think about it calmly. But the offer stands. Always. He stood up, still holding the baby. He looked at Nancy. Thank you for looking after them. For calling me. You're part of this, too. Nancy nodded, moved. I just did what was right. Edward took out his wallet and offered money. Nancy refused. I don't want money. I just want you to take good care of this baby. And this boy, too. Edward put away his wallet and extended his hand. Nancy shook it. I will, I promise. He turned to leave, but Luke called him. Mr. Montgomery? Yes? Who abandoned him? Who left him at the hospital door? Edward became serious. I don't know, but I will find out. And when I do, I will see that justice is done. Luke nodded. That was all he needed to hear. Edward left with the baby in his arms. Luke stood in the middle of the room, feeling an enormous emptiness in his chest. It was as if a part of him had been torn away. Nancy approached and placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. You did the right thing. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you loved him. And love always hurts when you have to let go. Luke slumped onto the sofa, tears finally falling. He cried as he hadn't cried since he had lost his parents. He cried for the loss, for the loneliness, for the emptiness. Nancy sat beside him and pulled him into a hug. And Luke, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to be just a child who needed comfort, solace, someone to tell him everything would be all right, even if he didn't believe it yet. The following days were strange. Luke returned to the streets, but everything seemed different. Empty. Without purpose. Mrs. Rose noticed the change. Father John did too, but no one knew exactly what to say. It was on a Friday afternoon that Edward returned. He arrived in a black car, attracting everyone's attention in the park. He got out and looked for Luke. He found him sitting, on a bench, staring at nothing. Hi, Luke. The boy looked up, surprised. Hi. Edward sat beside him. I've come to make you an offer. I want you to come and live with me. With us, Claire, Gabriel, and me. I want you to be a real part of our family. Luke looked at the man, incredulously. Why? Because you deserve it. Because you saved my son. Because you're special, Luke. And because I think you can teach us a lot about what truly matters in life. Luke was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the only thing that really mattered. And the baby? How is he? Edward smiled. He's great. Growing, eating well, smiling. Claire is recovering too. She wants to meet you. She wants to thank you personally. Luke felt something stir in his chest. A glimmer of hope. Small, fragile, but there. Can I see him? Of course, whenever you want. He's your brother now, if you agree to be part of the family. Luke looked at his own hands. Small, calloused, dirty hands. Hands that had cared for a baby with more love than many clean, soft hands. I accept. Edward smiled, his eyes shining. Then, let's go home. Luke stood up. He looked at the park, at the streets that had been his home for so long. He felt a pang of fear, but he also felt something new, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And as he got into the car beside Edward, as the city passed by the window, Luke allowed himself to dream of a warm bed, food on the table, a family, to dream of a future that, for the first time, seemed possible. But the story wasn't over yet, because there were still unanswered questions. Who had abandoned the baby? Why? And what would happen when the truth came to light? Those answers would come, sooner than Luke imagined, and when they did, they would change everything. Again. The Montgomery mansion was in Kensington, in a gated community with 24-hour security. Luke had never seen anything like it. The gate opened automatically when the car approached. Perfectly manicured gardens lined the entrance. The house was enormous, with 3 floors, immense windows, and a facade that looked like something out of a magazine. Luke felt his stomach churn. He didn't belong in this place. He was a street boy, dirty, uneducated, without manners. What was he doing here? Edward seemed to notice his discomfort. I know it's very different from what you're used to, but you'll get used to it. It's your home now. Luke didn't answer. He just looked out the window, trying to commit every detail to memory, as if he needed an escape route in case things went wrong. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. Edward got out and motioned for Luke to do the same. The boy obeyed, his legs shaky. The house door opened, and a woman appeared. She was beautiful, with brown hair tied in a ponytail and red eyes from crying. She wore a white dressing gown and looked fragile, as if she might break at any moment. Claire. Edward went to her and hugged her. She looked over his shoulder and saw Luke. Her eyes filled with tears. Is this him? Is this the boy who saved our son? Edward nodded. Claire released the embrace and walked towards Luke. The boy took a step back, instinctively, but she stopped, respecting his space. Thank you so much for taking care of my baby. Her voice was trembling, filled with emotion. Luke didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Where is he? Where's little one? Edward smiled. He's inside, with the nurse. Come, I'll take you to him. Luke followed the couple into the house. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that looked like works of art. Everything was grand, clean, perfect. Luke felt even more out of place. They went up a wide staircase to the second floor. Edward opened a door, and Luke saw a room that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Light blue walls, a white cot with a canopy, shelves full of stuffed animals, a colorful mobile hanging from the ceiling. And in the middle of it all, in a rocking chair, a woman in a white uniform held the baby. When Luke entered, the baby turned his little head. His eyes lit up, and he stretched out his arms, making joyful noises. The nurse looked surprised. He's never done that before, not even with his parents. Luke approached slowly. The baby continued to stretch out his arms, growing more agitated. When Luke finally picked him up, the little one snuggled against his chest, letting out a sigh of contentment. Claire put her hand to her mouth, moved. He remembers you. Luke felt his eyes sting. He hugged the baby tightly, feeling the familiar scent, the known weight. It was like coming home after a long journey. Hi, little one. I missed you. The baby grabbed Luke's finger and smiled, a toothless, innocent smile, full of trust. And at that moment, Luke knew he had made the right decision. He had returned to where he belonged, beside that little being who had changed his life forever. The first few days in the mansion were difficult. Luke didn't know how to behave. He was afraid to touch things, to get something dirty, to make noise. He ate little at meals, still unaccustomed to such abundance. He slept poorly, waking up in the middle of the night thinking he was back on the streets. But Claire and Edward were patient. They didn't force anything. They let Luke go at his own pace. Slowly, the boy began to relax. He started to explore the house, to ask questions, to feel less like an intruder and more like someone who belonged there. The room they prepared for him was bigger than the shack where he had lived with his parents. It had a huge bed, a wardrobe full of new clothes, a desk, shelves with books and games. It even had a window overlooking the garden. On the first night, Luke couldn't sleep in the bed. It was too soft, too warm, too big. He ended up sleeping on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. When Claire found him the next morning, she said nothing. She just put a mattress on the floor and let him sleep there until he got used to it. It was small gestures like these that won Luke over. Edward's patience when he didn't know how to use cutlery properly, Claire's smile when he spilled juice on the tablecloth, the way they never made him feel inferior or inadequate. And of course, there was the baby. Little one became the center of Luke's world. He spent hours in the baby's room, playing, talking, singing songs he didn't even know where they came from. He helped change nappies, bathe him, prepare bottles. It was as if he had been born for it. Claire watched everything with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Gratitude for having her son back, sadness for knowing she had almost lost him, and a guilt that gnawed at her. How had she let that happen? How had she not realized something was wrong? It was one night, 2 weeks after Luke had arrived, that the truth began to emerge. Edward was in his study, reviewing the security camera footage from the house. He had hired a private investigator to find out what had happened on the day of the disappearance. And finally, he had found something. He called Claire and Luke. The three Sun Mings gathered in the study. Edward turned on the computer and opened a video. The image showed the entrance to the house on the day of the disappearance. The nanny, Felicity, was leaving with the baby in the pram. Everything seemed normal. But then, Edward paused the image and zoomed in. He showed something no one had noticed before. In Felicity's bag, partially visible, was an envelope. A thick envelope, full of money. The investigator tracked her movements after she left the house. She didn't go straight to the bakery. First she stopped at a bank, deposited a large sum of money, then she went to the bakery. And that's where everything happened. Edward opened another video. This one was from the bakery's security camera. It showed Felicity entering with the pram. She bought bread, as she had said. But then, a woman approached. They talked. The woman took the baby from the pram. Felicity didn't react. She just accepted another envelope the woman gave her. And then, the woman left with the baby. Felicity waited a few minutes. Then, she started screaming, feigning desperation, saying the baby was gone, that someone had taken him. Claire put her hand to her mouth, horrified. She sold our son. Felicity sold our baby? Edward nodded, his jaw tight with anger. For money. For a paltry £50,000. And the woman, who is she? The investigator is tracking her, but we already have a lead. She works at a fertility clinic, has access to information about couples who want to adopt. Luke, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. But she didn't keep the baby. She abandoned him. Edward looked at the boy. How do you know? Because I found him that same night. If she wanted to keep him or sell him to someone, she wouldn't have left him in a basket at the hospital door. Edward frowned. Luke was right. Something didn't make sense. Maybe she regretted it, or was afraid of being caught. Or maybe it was never her intention to keep him. Maybe she just wanted to take him away from you. Claire looked at Luke, surprised. Why would anyone do that? Luke shrugged. I don't know. But people do bad things for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it doesn't even need to make sense. Edward and Claire exchanged a look. That 9-year-old boy had a wisdom that went beyond his age. A wisdom born of pain, loss, survival. We will find out the truth. I promise. Edward picked up the phone and called the investigator. He asked him to speed up the investigation, to find out who the woman was and why she had done it. Meanwhile, life in the mansion continued. Luke started attending school. It was difficult at first. He was behind the other students. He couldn't read properly, struggled with maths, had never studied science or history. But he was intelligent and hardworking. With the help of private tutors, he began to catch up. He made friends too. At first, the other children avoided him. They knew he had come from the streets, and that made them uncomfortable. But Luke had a way about him that disarmed people. He was honest, loyal, courageous. Gradually, he earned the respect and friendship of his classmates. At home, his relationship with Claire and Edward deepened. They didn't try to replace the parents Luke had lost. They knew no one could do that. But they offered something different. They offered security, support, unconditional love. And Luke, for the first time since he had lost his parents, allowed himself to be happy. Not a complete happiness, without pain or longing, but a possible happiness. A happiness built on the ruins of the past, but looking towards the future. It was on a Saturday afternoon, 3 months after Luke had arrived at the mansion, that the investigator finally brought answers. Edward received him in the study. Claire and Luke were also present. The investigator, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, opened a folder and spread photos and documents on the table. I found out who the woman is. Her name is Beatrice Smith. She works at a fertility clinic. As we suspected, but the story is more complicated than we imagined. He picked up a photo and showed it. It was a woman in her 30s, dark hair, sad eyes. Beatrice lost a child 2 years ago. He was the same age as your baby when he passed away. Complications at birth. She never recovered. Fell into deep depression. Her husband left her. She lost her job. Her life fell apart. Claire felt a pang of compassion. She knew that pain. She had tasted a bit of it when she thought she had lost her son. She started working at the clinic a year ago. Had access to patient files. And that's how she found out about you. About the baby. She became obsessed. Thought that if she had a baby again, she could overcome the loss. So she paid Felicity to steal our son? Yes, offered £50,000. Felicity was in debt, accepted without a second thought. And why did she abandon the baby? The investigator sighed. Because when she finally had the baby in her arms, she realized he wasn't her son, that he never would be. The pain wouldn't go away. The guilt only increased. She, panicked, didn't know what to do. So she left the baby at the hospital door, hoping someone would take care of him, and wrote that note. Luke felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger at the pain Beatrice had caused, but also compassion, because he understood what it was like to lose someone. He understood the despair, the loneliness, the willingness to do anything to fill the void. Where is she now? Hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Tried to harm herself when she realized what she had done. She's under medical care. And Felicity? Arrested. She'll face charges for kidnapping, extortion, and child abandonment. She'll be in prison for several years. Edward nodded, satisfied. Justice was being served. But Claire didn't seem relieved. She looked thoughtful. I want to talk to her. To Beatrice. Edward looked at his wife, surprised. Why? Because she's suffering, and I understand that suffering. I want to help. Claire, she stole our son. I know, and she will pay for it. But she is also a mother who lost a child, and that is a pain no one deserves to carry alone. Edward was silent. Then he nodded. He knew his wife. He knew that. When she decided something, there was no way to dissuade her. All right, I'll arrange a visit. A week later, Claire, Edward, and Luke went to the psychiatric hospital. Beatrice was in a small but clean room, sitting in a chair near the window, staring into space. When she saw Claire enter, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Claire approached and, to everyone's surprise, held Beatrice's hand. I know. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted my son back. I just wanted the pain to stop. I understand. If I had lost my son, I don't know what I would do. Maybe I would do worse things. Beatrice looked at Claire, incredulous. How can you forgive me? Because holding on to anger only hurts ourselves, and because you need help, not punishment. Claire turned to Edward. I want to pay for her treatment. I want her to have the help she needs to recover. Edward hesitated, but he saw the determination in his wife's eyes and agreed. All right, we'll help. Beatrice began to cry, not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from hope. Thank you. Thank you so much. Luke watched everything in silence. He saw Claire offering forgiveness to someone who had caused so much pain, and he learned something important that day. He learned that forgiving wasn't forgetting. It wasn't saying that what happened was right. It was choosing not to let the pain of the past poison the future. It was choosing to move forward. In the following months, the Montgomerys' life returned to normal, or at least to a new version of normal. Luke continued at school, getting better and better grades. The baby grew up healthy and happy. Claire returned to work at the hospital. Edward continued to manage the company. But there were changes, too. Deep changes. The family had gone through an ordeal that had transformed them. They had learned about loss, about love, about forgiveness. They had learned that family wasn't just blood, it was choice. It was commitment. It was being present in difficult times. And Luke had found something he thought he would never have again. He had found a home, not just a house with a roof and walls, but a place where he was loved, where he was important, where he belonged. One night, 6 months after he had arrived, at the mansion, Luke was in the baby's room. The little one slept peacefully in the cot. Luke watched him, remembering that rainy night when he had heard the cry, when he had made the choice that would change his life forever. Claire appeared at the door. "Still awake?" Luke nodded. "Just watching him sleep." Claire entered and stood beside Luke. "You know he loves you, right? More than he loves me and Edward sometimes, I think." Luke smiled. "That's not true." "It is. You were the first person who took care of him, the first one who made him feel safe. He'll never forget that." "I'll never forget it either. He saved me as much as I saved him." Claire put her arm around Luke's shoulders. "You saved each other, and you saved us too. You reminded us of what truly matters." They stood there in silence, watching the baby sleep. Two survivors, two souls who had found each other at the right time, and who, together, had built something beautiful, something lasting, a family. And as night fell over London, as the city continued its frantic pace outside, inside that house there was peace, there was love, there was hope. There was a future that, finally, seemed bright. 2 years had passed since that rainy night that changed everything. Luke was now 11 years old and was unrecognizable, not just physically, although he had grown and gained weight, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't existed before. A confidence, a joy. He was doing well at school. He had real friends. He played football on the school team. He had discovered that he liked to read, especially adventure stories. He had a family that loved him unconditionally. And he had a brother. Because that's what he called the baby now. No longer little one, but Gabriel. Edward and Claire had let Luke choose the name. And he had chosen Gabriel because it meant messenger of God. And in a way, that baby had been that. He had been the message that life was still worth living. That love still existed. That miracles still happened. Gabriel was 2.5 years old now. He was a joyful, curious, energetic child. He followed Luke everywhere. He called him Luca because he couldn't yet pronounce the full name. And Luke loved it. He loved being his little brother's hero. He loved teaching him things, playing with him, protecting him. One Saturday morning, Luke woke up with Gabriel jumping on his bed. "Luca! Luca! Wake up! Let's play!" Luke groaned, still sleepy. "Gabriel, it's too early." "No, it's not. The sun's already up. Come on." Luke opened one eye and saw his brother's radiant smile. He couldn't resist. He sat up in bed and pulled Gabriel into a hug. "Good morning, you rascal." "Good morning, Luca. Shall we play football?" "Let's. But first, breakfast." The two went down to the kitchen. Claire was already there making pancakes. When she saw the boys, she smiled. "Good morning, my loves." "Good morning, Mum." Luke was still surprised when he called Claire Mum. At first it had been difficult. He felt he was betraying the memory of his own mother. But Claire had been patient. She had said he didn't have to call her that if he didn't want to, that he could call her Claire or Auntie or whatever he felt comfortable with. But over time, Luke realized that loving Claire didn't mean forgetting Joanna, that the heart had room for more than one mother, and that honoring Joanna's memory was to live well, to be happy, to allow himself to love, and be loved. After breakfast, Luke and Gabriel went to the garden. Edward was there, watering the plants. "Dad, can I play football with Gabriel?" Edward smiled. It had also taken time for Luke to call him Dad, but now it felt natural. "Of course, but be careful not to break the windows again." Luke laughed. The previous week, he had kicked the ball too hard and broken the living room window. Edward had been angry for a minute, but then he had laughed too, because windows could be fixed. But the joy of seeing his children playing together was irreplaceable. The boys played football for an hour. Gabriel was still too small to play properly, but Luke was patient. He taught him to kick, to pass, to score. And when Gabriel finally hit the ball into the makeshift goal, Luke celebrated as if it were the World Cup. In the afternoon, the family received visitors. Mrs. Rose and Nancy had been invited for lunch. Luke was happy to see them. Even living in the mansion, he had never forgotten the people who helped him when he needed it most. Mrs. Rose brought sweets, as always. Nancy brought a chocolate cake. They all sat at the table, talking, laughing, sharing stories. "Look how much you've grown, Luke. You're a young man." Mrs. Rose pinched his cheek, making him blush. "Stop it, Mrs. Rose." "And you, Gabriel? You're big too, aren't you?" Gabriel hid behind Luke shyly, but he soon came out, attracted by the sweets Mrs. Rose offered. During lunch, Claire shared the news. "Beatrice was discharged from the hospital last week. She's living in a halfway house, doing therapy, working at an animal shelter. She's recovering well." "That's good. She deserves a second chance." Nancy had always been the most compassionate of them all. "And Felicity?" Edward became serious. "Still in prison. She'll be there for a few more years, but she's taking courses inside, trying to rehabilitate herself." Luke listened to everything in silence. He thought about how the choices people made could change entire lives. Beatrice had made a terrible choice, driven by desperation. Felicity had made a terrible choice, driven by greed. And he, Luke, had also made a choice. The choice to stay, to care, to love. And that choice had saved not only Gabriel. It had saved him too. After lunch, while the adults talked in the living room, Luke took Gabriel to his bedroom. He had something he wanted to show his brother. He opened a drawer and took out a shoebox. Inside there were old photos, yellowed by time, photos of Joanna and Mark, photos of baby Luke, photos of a family that no longer existed, but would never be forgotten. "Who's that, Luca?" Gabriel pointed to a photo of Joanna smiling. "That's my mum, the mum who gave birth to me." "You have two mums?" Luke smiled. "Yes. I'm lucky, aren't I? And me? Do I have two brothers?" Luke frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You and the baby you found. You said you found a baby." Luke laughed. Gabriel still didn't fully understand the story. "Gabriel, the baby I found was you." Gabriel's eyes widened. "It was me?" "It was. You were in a basket, crying, and I stayed with you. I looked after you, and now we're brothers forever." Gabriel processed the information. Then, with the simplicity of children, he asked, "Do you love me, Luca?" "I do, more than anything. I love you too." Gabriel threw himself into Luke's arms, and the boy hugged him tight, feeling immense gratitude for that little being who had entered his life in the most improbable way possible. That night, after everyone had left and Gabriel was asleep, Luke went out into the garden. He liked to be there at night, looking at the stars, thinking about life. Edward found him there. "May I join you?" Luke nodded. Edward sat beside him on the wooden bench. "Are you happy, Luke?" The boy thought for a moment. "I am. Happier than I thought would ever be possible." "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve it, son." They sat in silence for a while. Then, Luke asked something that had been on his mind for months. "Dad, why did you do all this for me? I was just a street boy. You didn't have to adopt me. You could have just given me a reward, and that would have been it." Edward looked at Luke with eyes bright with emotion. "Because you saved our son, not just physically, but in a deeper way. You showed us what truly matters. You, a 9-year-old boy who had nothing, gave everything for Gabriel. While we, who had everything, almost lost him through carelessness. You taught us about love, about sacrifice, about what it means to be family. And because of that, you are not just someone we helped. You are our son. Truly." Luke felt tears stream down his face. Tears of gratitude, of love, of belonging. "Thank you. For everything." Edward pulled him into a hug. "Thank you, son, for giving us the chance to be the family you deserve." They stayed there, embraced, under the starry sky. Two men of different generations, united by a love that transcended blood and circumstances. Shakyo. Sunday, the family went to church. Not St. Joseph's Church, where Luke had hidden with Gabriel, but a church near their home. Father John had been transferred there, and Luke made a point of visiting him whenever he could. When the priest saw Luke and the family, he smiled broadly. "My boy, how you've grown." "Hi, Father John." They talked after Mass. Luke told him the news. School, friends, football. Father John listened attentively, proud. "You know you're a miracle, don't you, Luke?" "What do you mean?" "You could have become bitter, rebellious, lost. But you chose love. You chose to care for someone when no one was caring for you, and that changed everything. Not just for you, but for everyone around you." Luke thought about the priest's words. He was right. A choice. A single choice on a rainy night had changed the course of several lives. "Father, do you think my parents would be proud of me?" Father John placed his hand on Luke's shoulder. "I am absolutely certain. They are looking down on you, smiling, knowing that they raised an extraordinary son." Luke smiled. His heart warmed. On Monday, Luke returned to school. He had an important presentation. Each student had to tell a story about overcoming adversity. Luke knew exactly what he was going to talk about. He went onto the stage, nervous. He looked at the audience and saw Claire, Edward, and Gabriel sitting in the front row. Gabriel waved, excited. Luke waved back and took a deep breath. "My story begins on a rainy night. I was 9 years old and lived on the streets. I had no one. I had nothing. I only had hunger, cold, and loneliness. But that night, I heard a cry, and when I went to see what it was, I found a baby, abandoned, alone, like me." The audience was in absolute silence, listening to every word. "I could have left him there. I could have called someone and walked away, but I didn't. I picked him up, and when he stopped crying, when he grabbed my finger and looked at me with those eyes full of trust, I knew I had to stay, that we needed each other." Luke told the whole story. The days on the streets caring for Gabriel, the fear of being discovered, the decision to return him to his family, and the surprise of being welcomed in, too. "Today, I have a family, I have a home, I have food, clothes, school, but more important than all of that, I have love, and I learned that love is not something we passively receive. It's something we choose to give, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts, because in the end, it's love that saves us. It's love that transforms us. It's love that makes us human." When he finished, there was silence, then applause that started slowly and grew into a standing ovation. Luke saw Claire wiping away tears. Edward, smiling proudly. Gabriel jumping in his seat, shouting, "That's my brother! That's my Luca!" And Luke knew at that moment that he had found his place in the world. He was no longer the lost boy on the streets. He was Luke Montgomery, son, brother, friend, survivor, hero. But above all, he was someone who had chosen love, and that choice had made all the difference. The years continued to pass. Luke grew up, graduated, went to university. He studied social work because he wanted to help other children like him. He wanted to give them the chance he had received. Gabriel grew up too. He became an intelligent, kind, lively boy, and he never forgot that he owed his life to his older brother, to the boy who had stayed when everyone else had left. Claire and Edward grew old together, happy, grateful to have been blessed with two extraordinary children. Two children who had come into their lives in the most improbable way, but who had completed their family in a way they never imagined possible. And sometimes, on rainy nights, Luke would go out into the garden and look at the sky. He remembered that night, that cry, that choice, and he gave thanks. He gave thanks for having heard, for having gone, for having stayed, because staying when everyone leaves is the most courageous act of love that exists. And Luke had learned that at 9 years old, on a rainy night, in central London, when a boy with nothing found a baby with no one, and together they found everything. Luke was 17 when everything changed again. Not in the dramatic way of that rainy night years ago, but in an equally profound way. He was in his final year of secondary school, with excellent, grades, and a guaranteed place at university to study social work. Gabriel was 8 years old, and in year 3, a smart and charismatic boy who charmed everyone he met. Life in the Montgomery family had become a comfortable routine. Luke helped Gabriel with his homework every afternoon. They had dinner together every night talking about their day. On weekends, they went to the park, to the cinema, or simply stayed home playing video games. It was a normal life, a good life, a life Luke had never imagined possible. But one Thursday afternoon, as Luke was returning from school, he received a call from Claire. Her voice was strange, too controlled, as if she was holding something big back. "Luke, can you come home now? I need to talk to you." "Is everything all right, Mum? Has something happened?" "Everything's fine. Just come, please." Luke felt a chill in his stomach. He took the fastest bus he could and arrived home 20 minutes later. Claire was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a folder of documents on her lap. Edward was beside her, holding her hand. Gabriel was playing in the garden, oblivious to the tension in the air. "What happened?" Claire took a deep breath. "Sit down, son. I need to tell you something." Luke sat down, his heart racing. 1,000 possibilities ran through his head. Was someone sick? Were they having financial problems? Were they moving? "This morning I received a call from a social worker. She said she found someone who has been looking for you for years." Luke frowned. "Looking for me? Who?" Claire opened the folder and took out a photo. It was of a woman in her 40s, gray hair, tired but kind eyes. Luke looked at the photo, not recognizing her. "Who is she?" "She's your aunt, your mother's sister. Her name is Sonia." Luke felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Aunt? He had an aunt? But I didn't know my mum had a sister. "She lived in the countryside, in Cornwall. She lost contact with your mother many years ago. When she heard what happened to your mother and father, she tried to find you, but you had already run away. She searched for years, and now finally she found you." Luke didn't know what to feel. Joy? Fear? Confusion? All at once. "She wants to see me?" "She does, but only if you want to. No one will force you to do anything." Luke looked at Edward, who had remained silent until then. "What do you think, Dad?" Edward chose his words carefully. "I think you have the right to know your history, to know where you came from. But I also think you have the right to choose. If you don't want to meet her, that's fine. You are our son. That doesn't change." "And if I want to meet her? Does that change anything?" Claire held Luke's hand. "It changes. Nothing. You will always be our son, always have a place here. But if you want to meet your aunt, have a relationship with her, we support it. Because loving you means wanting the best for you, even if that means sharing you with other people." Luke felt his eyes sting. He looked at that photo, at that woman who was blood family, but who was a complete stranger, and he thought of the family he had built, of Claire and Edward, who had taken him in when no one else would, of Gabriel, who was his brother in every sense that mattered. "I want to meet her, but I don't want it to change anything here. You are my family, always will be." Claire pulled him into a tight hug. "And you are our son, always will be." The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. Sonia would come to London especially for it. Luke spent the previous days nervous, anxious, full of questions. What would she be like? Would she be like Joanna? Would she have stories about his mother, about the family he never knew? Gabriel noticed something was different. "Luca, you're acting strange. Has something happened?" Luke thought about lying, but decided to be honest. Gabriel deserved to know the truth. "I'm going to meet my aunt, my real mum's sister." Gabriel processed the information. "Are you leaving?" The question came out so small, so frightened, that it broke Luke's heart. "No, of course not. I'm just going to meet her, but I live here, with you, with Mum and Dad. This is my home." Gabriel seemed relieved. "Promise?" "I promise." They sealed the agreement with a handshake and then a hug. And Luke realized once again how much that boy meant to him. How much that family meant. Saturday arrived too quickly. Sonia came to the Montgomerys' house. When the doorbell rang, Luke felt his legs tremble. Claire opened the door. Sonia was exactly like in the photo. Gray hair, tired eyes, simple clothes. But when she saw Luke, her face lit up. And Luke saw, in that face, traces of Joanna, the shape of her eyes, the way she smiled, and he felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost knocked him over. "Luke?" Her voice was trembling. Luke nodded, unable to speak. Sonia took a step forward, hesitant, then another, and then she couldn't hold back anymore. She ran and hugged Luke tightly, crying, my boy, I looked for you so much." Luke let himself be hugged. He felt her scent, different but familiar at the same time. He felt her tears wetting his shoulder. And he cried, too, for everything he had lost, for everything he had found, for everything that was yet to come. When they finally separated, Sonia looked at Luke as if she was memorizing every detail. "You're just like your mother. Her eyes, her smile, it's like seeing her again." Luke smiled through his tears. "I don't remember much about her. I'll tell you everything you want to know." They sat in the living room. Claire served coffee and cake. Edward stayed nearby, discreet but present. Gabriel watched everything from a distance, curious. Sonia told stories of when Joanna was a child, of how stubborn and courageous she was, of how she had run away from home at 18 to come to London in search of a better life, of how Sonia had been angry at the time, but later understood. She had even tried to reconnect, but Joanna had changed address, and they had lost contact. When she heard her sister had passed away, Sonia was devastated, and when she found out there was a nephew, she tried everything to find him. But Luke had disappeared. Until, months ago, she saw a report on television about a boy who had saved a baby, and when she saw the name, Luke Montgomery, and the photo, she knew it was him. It took months to track him down, to get in touch with the family. But finally, she had succeeded. "I didn't come here to take you away from them. I know they are your family now. And I thank God that you found such good people. But I wanted you to know that you have another family too, that you have an aunt who loves you, that you have cousins who want to meet you, that you have roots, a history." Luke listened to everything, absorbing every word, and he realized that he didn't have to choose. He could have both families. He could honor the past without abandoning the present. "I want to meet them. I want to know where I came from. I want to hear stories about my mum. But I also want you to know that I have a family here, and that they are as important to me as you are." Sonia smiled, her eyes shining. "I know, my son, and I don't want to change that. I just want to be a part of your life, however you let me." Luke looked at Claire and Edward, who nodded encouragingly. He looked at Gabriel, who had approached and was now by his side. And he looked at Sonia, this woman who was a piece of the past he thought he had lost forever. "Then let's do this. You come visit us whenever you can, and I'll visit you in Cornwall too. We'll get to know each other gradually, build a relationship. No rush, no pressure." Sonia nodded, moved. That would be perfect. Gabriel, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Are you Luca's aunt?" Sonia looked at the boy and smiled. "I am." "Then are you my aunt too?" The question took everyone by surprise. Sonia looked at Claire and Edward, not knowing what to say. It was Luke who answered. "Yes, Gabriel. If she's my aunt, she's yours too. Because we're brothers, remember?" Gabriel smiled, satisfied with the answer, and Sonia felt her heart warm. That boy, who had no blood relation to her, had accepted her as family without hesitation. Because for him, family wasn't about DNA. It was about love, about choice, about being present. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Sonia told more stories, showed old photos she had brought, photos of Joanna as a child, teenager, young woman. Luke looked at each one carefully, trying to engrave in his memory the face of the mother he barely remembered. When it was time for Sonia to leave, she promised to return, soon, and Luke promised to visit her during the holidays. They hugged for a long time, an embrace that carried years of longing, of loss, but also of hope. After she left, Luke stood in the garden, looking at the stars. Gabriel came to sit beside him. "Did you like her, Luca?" "I did. She's nice. She looks like my mum." "Are you going to live with her?" Luke looked at his brother, surprised. "No! I already told you I'm not leaving. Why are you asking that again?" Gabriel shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. But Luke knew his brother too. "Well, Gabriel, look at me." The boy looked, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm scared you'll leave. That you'll leave me, like that woman who left me in the basket." Luke felt his heart clench. He pulled Gabriel into a tight hug. "I will never leave you. Never. You are my brother, my best friend, the most important person in my life, and nothing in the world, will change that. Understand?" Gabriel nodded, clinging to his brother. "I understand." They stayed there, embraced, under the starry sky, two brothers who didn't share blood but who shared something much stronger. They shared history. They shared love. They shared life. In the following weeks, life returned to normal. Luke continued studying, preparing for his university entrance exams. Gabriel continued to be Gabriel, full of energy and mischief. Claire and Edward continued to be the loving and present parents they had always been. But there was something new, too. Sonia called every week. She sent letters, photos, family recipes. She told stories of Cornwall, of life in the countryside, of the cousins who wanted to meet Luke, and little by little, Luke built a bridge between his past and his present, between who he had been and who he had become. It was during one of these phone conversations that Sonia extended an invitation. "Luke, next month is your mother's birthday. We always have a mass in her honor. Would you like to come?" Luke was silent for a moment. He had never been to his parents' grave. He had never had the courage. But perhaps it was time. "Where are they buried?" "In London itself, at Highgate Cemetery. I go every year. I take flowers, I talk to her, I tell her the news." "I want to go, but I want to take my family too. Can I?" "Of course you can, my son. Your mother would love to meet the people who care for you." On the appointed day, Luke, Claire, Edward, Gabriel, and Sonia went to the cemetery together. It was a sunny morning, which seemed strange for such a sad place. They walked among the headstones until they reached a simple one, with the names of Joanna and Mark engraved. Luke stood still, looking. He felt a wave of emotions, sadness for the loss, anger for having been taken from him so early, but also gratitude for having existed, for having given him life, for having taught him, even if for a short time, what it was to be loved. Claire placed her hand on his shoulder. "Do you want to be alone?" Luke shook his head. "No, I want you all to stay. You are part of this too." Sonia placed flowers on the grave. Then she stepped back, giving Luke space. The boy knelt before the headstone. He ran his fingers over the engraved names. "Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. I know it's been a long time. Sorry I didn't come sooner. I was scared of feeling the pain again. But I'm here now, and I want you to know that I'm doing well. More than well. I have a family that loves me, that cares for me, that gave me everything you would have wanted to give." His voice faltered. Gabriel approached and held his hand. "And I have a brother. Gabriel, he's amazing. You would love him. He's funny, smart, brave, and he makes me want to be a better person every day." Luke looked at Claire and Edward. "And I have parents again. Not to replace you. No one will ever replace you, but to continue what you started. To love me the way you loved me." He took a deep breath, tears streaming freely. "I miss you every day, but I know you're proud of me. I know you're looking down from above, smiling, happy because I found my way, and I promise I'll keep making you proud. I'll study, I'll help other children like me, I'll be a good person. For you, and for me." He stayed there for a few more minutes, in silence. Then he stood up. Claire hugged him. Edward too. Gabriel hung on his leg. And Sonia, from a distance, watched with tears in her eyes. When they left the cemetery, Luke felt different, lighter, as if he had left a weight behind. Not the memory of his parents, that he would always carry with love, but the pain, the anger, the resentment, that he had left there, buried with them. Now he could move forward, with the past honored but not held captive by it, with the future open, full of possibilities. That night, at home, Luke wrote in his diary. It was something he had started doing at the suggestion of the psychologist he visited once a week. Writing helped him process emotions, organize his thoughts. "Today, I visited my parents. It was difficult, but it was also good. I told them I'm doing well, that I have a family. And I realized something. I didn't lose one family and gain another. I have two families. The one that gave me life, and the one that gave me a life, and both are important. Both are part of who I am. I am Luke, son of Joanna and Mark, son of Claire and Edward, brother of Gabriel, nephew of Sonia. I'm all these things at the same time, and it's okay, because family is not just one thing. Family is everything we build with love. He closed the notebook and looked out the window. Outside, the city slept. The same city that had been so cruel to him years ago, but which had also given him Gabriel, which had given him a second chance, and Luke was determined to seize it. Every day, every moment, every opportunity to make a difference, to spread love, to be for others what so many people had been for him. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not where you came from, but where you were going, and with whom you chose to walk. 5 years had passed since that day at the cemetery. Luke was now 22 and in his final year of university, studying social work. He had become a confident, determined young man, passionate about the work he did. He interned at an NGO that served homeless children, and every day he saw a little of himself in those frightened and distrustful faces. Gabriel was 13 and in year 8. He continued to be that cheerful and charismatic boy, but now with the complexity of adolescence beginning to emerge. He had discovered a passion for music and spent hours playing the guitar in his room. He dreamed of becoming a musician, to the dismay of Edward, who hoped his son would follow in his footsteps in business. But the biggest change had happened to Claire. 2 years ago, she had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Nothing that immediately threatened her life, but something that required constant treatment and left her tired, fragile. She had had to reduce her workload at the hospital. She spent more time at home, resting, taking care of herself. And Luke had been by her side every step of the way. He accompanied her to appointments when Edward couldn't. He helped with her medication. He kept her company on nights when the pain wouldn't let her sleep, because that's what family did. They were present, in good times and bad. One Friday afternoon, Luke came home and found Claire in the kitchen, trying to prepare dinner. She was pale, clearly exhausted. "Mum, what are you doing? You should be resting." "I wanted to make that lasagna you all like. It's been a while since I cooked for the family." Luke gently took the spoon from her hand. "I'll do it. You sit down and keep me company." Claire protested, but eventually gave in. She sat on a stool and watched Luke cook. He had learned over the years. He wasn't a chef, but he managed well. "You've grown so much, Luke. Sometimes I look at you and I can't believe you're the same thin, frightened boy who arrived here years ago." Luke smiled, chopping tomatoes. "I can't believe it sometimes either. It feels like another life." "It was another life, but you brought the best of that life into this one. The courage, the determination, the ability to love even when everything seems lost." Luke stopped what he was doing and looked at Claire. "I learned that from you and Dad. You showed me that it was possible to start over, that it was possible to trust again." Claire felt her eyes well up. "And you showed us what truly matters. Before you and Gabriel arrived, we had everything: money, success, comfort. But something was missing. Purpose was missing. True love was missing. You filled that void. Mom, don't talk like that. You'll make me cry and I'm cutting onions. It'll get confusing." Claire laughed, and Luke loved that sound. Lately, she laughed less. The illness had stolen a lot from her, but in the moments she laughed, it was as if everything returned to normal, as if she were invincible again. Gabriel arrived home from school shortly after, throwing his backpack on the floor and heading straight for the fridge. "Hi, Mum. Hi, Luca. I'm starving." "Pick up your backpack from the floor, and dinner's almost ready." Gabriel obeyed, grumbling, but when he saw Claire, his face softened. "Mum, are you okay? You're very pale." "I'm fine, love. Just a little tired." "Did you take your medicine?" "I did. You and Luke have become my private nurses." "That's because we love you, and we want you to be well." Claire pulled Gabriel into a hug. The boy had grown so much. He was almost her height now. Soon he would be taller. Soon he would be a man. And she wanted to be there to see it. She wanted to see both her sons grow up, graduate, build their lives. But she knew she might not have that much time. The illness was progressing. The doctors were optimistic but realistic. She had years ahead, but not decades. And that scared her, not for herself, but for her sons, for Edward, For everything, she still wanted to live with them. Edward arrived later, bringing flowers for Claire and pizza to complement the lasagna. "I thought we could have a family movie night. How about it?" Gabriel immediately perked up. "Can it be a horror movie?" "No, you know I don't like those." Claire was categorical about it. "Then a comedy?" "Comedy's fine." They had dinner together, talking, laughing, sharing stories of the day. Then they settled into the TV room. Claire lay on the sofa, her head in Edward's lap. Gabriel sat on the floor, leaning against Luke's legs. And they watched a silly movie, one of those that don't require much brain power but make you laugh. In the middle of the movie, Luke looked around. At that scene so simple, so everyday, and he felt immense gratitude for that moment, for that family, for that life he had built on the ashes of the past. When the movie ended, Gabriel was already asleep. Luke carried him to his room, as he used, to when his brother was little. Only now Gabriel was heavy, almost his size. But Luke didn't complain. He just put him in bed, took off his shoes, covered him with the blanket, and kissed his forehead. "Good night, bro. I love you." Gabriel mumbled something unintelligible and turned over. Luke smiled and left the room. When he went downstairs, he found Claire and Edward still in the living room, talking quietly. Did he fall asleep? He did. He was exhausted. Edward motioned for Luke to sit down. "We wanted to talk to you about something." Luke felt his stomach clench. Conversations that started like that were never good. "What is it?" Claire held Edward's hand, seeking strength. "I'm going to need surgery next month. It's risky but necessary. The doctors think it can greatly improve my quality of life, maybe even give me more time." Luke felt the world spin. "How risky?" Edward answered, his voice firm but his eyes worried. "There's a chance it could go wrong. It's not big, but it exists. And we wanted you to know, because you are part of this family, and we make important decisions together." Luke looked at Claire. At that woman who had been a mother when he needed it most, who had given him love, security, a home, who had taught him that it was possible to start over. "Do you want to have the surgery?" "I do, because I want to have more time with you. I want to see you graduate. I want to see Gabriel grow up. I want to live, Luke. And if there's a chance, however small, I'm going to take it." Luke nodded, swallowing his tears. "Then we'll be with you, every step, and everything will be all right." "It has to be." Claire smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you, son. For being here. For being you." They embraced, the three of them, a family united by love, by choice, by the determination to be present for each other, no matter what. The following weeks were spent in preparation. Claire underwent all the necessary exams. She put things in order. She wrote letters to Luke and Gabriel in case something went wrong. Letters she hoped would never need to be read, but which she wanted to leave, just in case. Luke tried to maintain a normal routine. He went to university, to his internship, looked after Gabriel. But inside, he was terrified. The idea of losing Claire was unbearable. He had already lost one mother. He couldn't lose another. Gabriel noticed something was wrong. "Luca, Mum's going to be okay, isn't she?" Luke wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes, everything would be fine. But he had learned that honesty, even when it hurt, was always better. "I don't know, Gabriel. The surgery is risky, but Mum is strong, and she has us, and that counts for a lot. What if she's not okay? What if we lose her?" Gabriel's voice came, out small, frightened. Luke pulled his brother into a hug. "Then we'll be sad. Very sad. But we'll stay together. You, me, and Dad, and we'll get through it. Because that's what we do. We survive. We keep going, even when it hurts." Gabriel clung to his brother, crying, and Luke let him. Because sometimes, crying was the only thing you could do. The day of the surgery arrived. They all went to the hospital. Claire was calm, serene. She had made peace with whatever might happen. She kissed Edward long. She hugged Gabriel, whispering words of love and encouragement. And then she turned to Luke. "Look after them for me. If anything goes wrong, look after Edward and Gabriel. You know how to do that better than anyone." Luke shook his head, tears falling. "It won't go wrong. You'll come out of this surgery and you'll be well, and we'll have many years ahead of us still." Claire smiled and touched his face. "You gave me the best years of my life, Luke. Thank you for choosing to stay, for bringing Gabriel to us, for teaching us what true love is." "Mom, stop. You're talking as if you're saying goodbye." "It's not goodbye. It's gratitude. Because even if I come out of this surgery, I want you to know how important you are, how much you changed my life, our life." She kissed his forehead and was wheeled into the operating theater. Luke, Edward, and Gabriel stayed in the waiting room. Endless hours. Every minute seemed an eternity. Gabriel was restless, pacing back and forth. Edward was tense, his hands clenched, his jaw tight. And Luke was silent, praying to a God he didn't always believe in, but in whom he wanted to believe at that moment. "Please, please, let her be okay. We need her. I need her." After 6 hours, the doctor finally appeared. Everyone stood up with a jump. "How is she?" The doctor smiled, tired but relieved. "The surgery was a success. She's in recovery. She'll need a few days in the hospital, but the prognosis is very good." Edward let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Gabriel began to cry with relief, and Luke felt his legs give way. He sat down heavily, his head in his hands, his body trembling. She had made it. Claire had made it. They were able to see her a few hours later. She was pale, with tubes and monitors around her, but she was alive. She was breathing. She was there. Edward held her hand, kissing it repeatedly. Gabriel stood beside her, holding her other hand, and Luke stood at the foot of the bed, watching, etching that image into his memory. The family reunited, all alive, all together. Claire slowly opened her eyes. She saw Edward, she saw Gabriel, she saw Luke, and she smiled. "Hi." Her voice was hoarse, weak, but it was her voice. "Hi, love. You did it. You're amazing." Edward was openly crying. "I said you'd be fine." Claire tried to laugh, but grimaced in pain. The following days were for recovery. Luke practically lived at the hospital. He missed classes, missed his internship. Nothing mattered more than being there, with Claire, helping her walk through the corridors, reading to her, keeping her company. And on one of those afternoons, while Claire rested and Luke read a book beside her bed, she spoke, her eyes still closed. "Luke, I need to tell you something." He closed the book. "What is it, Mum?" "When I was in surgery, I had a dream. Or maybe it was real, I don't know. But I saw a woman. She was beautiful, with kind eyes. And she told me, 'Thank you for caring for my son. Thank you for loving him as I would love him.'" Luke felt a shiver run down his spine. "Do you think it was her? My mum?" Claire opened her eyes and looked at Luke. "I think so." And I told her, "Thank you for giving him to the world, because he saved my son, and he saved me too." Luke felt tears stream down his face. He held Claire's hand. "I love you, Mum. So much. I love you too, son. So much." They stayed like that, holding hands in silence. Two survivors, two souls who had found each other when they needed it most, and who had built something beautiful, something eternal. Claire was discharged a week later. She returned home weak, but alive. And little by little, she regained her strength. She started walking without help again. She started cooking again. She started smiling without pain. And the family returned to their routine. But it was a different routine, more conscious, more grateful. Because they had almost lost something precious. And now they knew, more than ever, the value of every moment together. Luke graduated a few months later. It was an emotional ceremony. Claire, Edward, and Gabriel were in the front row, applauding when he went up on stage to receive his diploma. Sonia had come from Cornwall especially for the event. Mrs. Rose and Nancy were also there. Father John had given his blessing. When his name was called, Luke walked to the stage with a racing heart. He received his diploma, turned to the audience, and looked for his family. When he found them, he smiled. A huge, radiant smile, full of gratitude. He had made it. Against all odds, he had made it. The street boy had become a social worker. The boy who had nothing had achieved everything that mattered. At the graduation party, Edward made a toast. To Luke, who taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about love. It's about being present. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for giving us the chance to be your family. Luke felt his eyes sting. He looked around, at all those people he loved. Who loved him back, and he realized that he had found something that many people search for their entire lives and never found. He had found his place in the world. He had found his purpose. He had found his family. And as they toasted, as they laughed and talked, Luke thought about that rainy night so many years ago, that cry that had changed everything, that choice to stay when it was easier to leave. And he gave thanks. He gave thanks for having heard, for having gone, for having stayed. Because that choice had saved not only Gabriel, it had saved him too. It had given him a life, a family, a future. And now, graduated, ready to start his career, Luke was determined to make a difference, to be for other children what so many people had been for him, to spread love, hope, possibilities. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not where you came from, but what you did with the opportunities you received. And Luke was determined to make the most of every single one of them. For him, for Gabriel, for Claire and Edward, for Joanna and Mark, for all who had believed in him when he himself did not. And as the party continued, as the music played and people danced, Luke looked at Gabriel, who was trying to impress a girl with his guitar skills, and smiled. Life was good. Life was full of possibilities, and Luke was ready to embrace them, all of them, because he had learned in the hardest way possible that life was worth it, that love was worth it, that staying when everyone leaves was worth it, always.